Good morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock and we're going to get started. I'm Becky Donaldson. If there are some new people on that may not have met me before, I'm happy to meet you. I'm a coordinator at the Utah State Board of Education in the Student Support Division, and part of my role in that capacity is serving as the State Title I Director. We're so happy that you could join us this morning. My team and I are happy to have the opportunity to present to you this morning. So I'll be starting a slideshow in a few minutes, but I'd like to thank my team who has helped prepare this presentation. I appreciate their input and the time and effort that they have spent preparing their portions of the presentation today. Becky Peters, who is my assistant and is always my right hand in helping to get things organized and arranged and making things work correctly. And our wonderful Jerry Record, who is our director of our media services at the Utah State Board of Education. And Jerry has been an enormous help to us in getting this set up and ready to go and troubleshooting. So we appreciate Jerry's assistance. We have a new person at USBE that I'd like to take a second to introduce. Tracy Van Deventer has joined our team as of July, and I'll let Tracy introduce herself in just a second. Some of you may have had the privilege of working with Tracy in the past. She's been a highly successful school principal in a number of very high poverty Title I schools. She's done some incredible transformation work in those schools, working closely with the faculty and staff, the parents and the students to really transform schools into these amazing learning organizations. She's also served as a district administrator. She has a wealth of experience at all levels of the education system, elementary, middle, junior high school, as well as high school. And so Tracy had joined our office on July 15th as the director of the Center for Continuous School Improvement at the Utah State Board of Education. So she will be leading that school improvement work. So Tracy, would you take a minute and let us see you?
Oh, I have my private plane background still on. I didn't realize that. I'm not really flying on a fancy jet, but it makes me feel important. Again, my name's Tracy Van Deventer, and I am thrilled to be here as the director of the Utah Center for Continuous School Improvement. I've worked in the Salt Lake District and I've worked in Ogden District most recently. But as Becky said, I've had a couple of different jobs in education, including UEN in the state office long time ago, for those of you who remember the US West Utah Link network project. So I'm glad to be here, and I want to reach out and let you know that whatever you need, we are working to provide the best support and services for you. We know your job is especially tough right now, especially in the midst of the COVID-19 experience. And if there's anything that we can do to provide support for you in this process, please reach out and let us know. It is our intent that everything we do is always here to support you and, of course, your students. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, you will love having an opportunity to meet Tracy and to work with her. Other members of our team that will be presenting today, Dr. Max Lang and Leslie Evans will be providing some information about school improvement efforts that are going on right now. Val Murdoch is our Title I monitoring specialist. So Val will present about monitoring and will provide a list of those LEAs that are on the list to be monitored this year. Most likely that will happen virtually due to the pandemic. Tammy Long and Sandra Grant are our fiscal managers that support the ESEA programs, and they will talk to you about some fiscal information and requirements. And then I will wrap up, and we'll try to stop periodically for questions. Tracy is going to be monitoring questions that you can put into the chat box, and the presenters will try to stop at strategic points along the way to respond to your questions. But certainly at the end, we can also respond to questions at that point in time. So I'm going to share my screen and pull up the PowerPoint right now. Let's see. Let's see, I'm not seeing it. So let me try that again.
Becky, we all can see it.
Oh, you can see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, it just needs to be put in presenter mode.
Okay, thank you for letting me know, Val, because I wasn't, that wasn't showing on my screen. Here we go. All right, now I'm seeing it. So I want, as I said, I want to welcome you today to our Title I presentation. And let's see, I don't know why these slides are not advancing. Can you see the second slide, Val, or is it still on the?
Yes, it's advancing.
Oh, it is advancing. Okay, because it's just doing something weird for me. So we're going to go ahead and go on. I want to really call your attention to the statutory purpose of Title I. This is critically important, and I take this very, very seriously as the state Title I director. And as LEA Title I directors, this should be your primary purpose. So as you think about allocating your Title I funds, as you work with school principals within your LEA that receive Title I money, this always has to be at the forefront. Title I was first came into being in April of 1965. It was the Elementary Secondary Education Act, signed into law in April of 1965 by President Lyndon B. Johnson. It was part of the civil rights legislation that was taking place during that time period. And it was part of President Johnson's war on poverty. As a young man, President Johnson was a teacher in a very, very high poverty community right along the border of Texas and Mexico. And he saw firsthand the effects of poverty on the children that he was teaching and the families that he was interacting with in the community. And this really made an impact on him as a young man. He would write home to his mother and call home and ask for his family to send money and food and clothing and other things so that he could help these children and these families. So when he was president, this was a real huge priority for him, was to get this legislation passed through Congress so that he could sign it. And at the time that he signed it, he brought his first grade teacher that he had had as a 6-year-old boy and had her be present for that signing. So it was a historic thing for public education. Title I is the largest federally funded K-12 education program in the nation. So the purpose and goal of Title I is to provide all children with a significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, high-quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. So as I said, every decision that we make as to how we're going to spend our Title I funds and the services we're going to provide for children, for educators in Title I schools, and for the families in those school communities should be viewed through this lens. And it should all be about making sure that they have an equitable opportunity to receive high quality education and that we're always working to close educational achievement gaps. There's some other pieces that come under Title I, but Title I Part A is the main part, which is improving basic programs operated by local education agencies. There are a number of goals of the Title I program, and Utah, the last 2 or 3 years, we've received approximately $81 million, and most of that money goes out to LEAs across the state to serve students who attend schools with higher poverty. Title I is sort of the icing on the cupcake. So Title I schools have to receive that basic cupcake that includes their state and local funding. And then Title I comes all over the top of that. So it's the frosting, the sprinkles that go on top. And it's to provide supplemental services that are designed to compensate for the fact that some of the youth and the children in our schools are disadvantaged because they are living in low-income families. Some of our children are learning English. Some of them may be experiencing homelessness. They have a various situations, but the thing that's really the primary marker is poverty. That's the thing that makes the challenges that we face in society for these children and their families. So we want to make sure that money is used to help children achieve academically, again, close those achievement gaps. We have hundreds of schools in the state of Utah that were identified under the Every Student Succeeds Act as targeted support and improvement schools, which means that at least one of the disaggregated student groups in that school is performing at the same level as the lowest 5% of schools. I think there are over 500, and perhaps Max and Leslie can talk more about that when they get to the school improvement section. But that means we're not closing achievement gaps. If we have 500 schools identified with one or more low-performing student groups. And in our state, those groups are primarily students with disabilities, students who are learning English, and students who are economically disadvantaged. So it's really important that we focus on those things, and we want to make sure that we provide professional learning opportunities for educators in Title I schools that are high quality, they're evidence-based, they are ongoing, job embedded, meaningful based on the needs of the students and the teachers within a specific school campus. We also want to make sure that parents and families have opportunities to learn meaningful ways in which they can support their children's learning. So it goes beyond just having the yearly family literacy night or the yearly family math night. It's really bringing parents in as partners and working with them in ways that will really empower them to support their children. And we want children to have a high quality, well-rounded education. So really our primary purpose is improving student achievement, going back to that statutory purpose. So we know that evidence-based strategies, practices, programs are important. And one of the key pieces of ESSA, when the ESEA was reauthorized as No Child Left Behind, and then when it was reauthorized again as the Every Student Succeeds Act, Congress put in provisions indicating that we need to use our funding on things that have evidence base of really making a difference for students. Also, we want children to have opportunities for extended learning time options. So before and after school programs, meaningful summer school opportunities, offering full-day kindergarten for students in our at-risk schools, and offering opportunities for children to participate in high-quality preschool programs. So we're going to get in now into some of the requirements of Title I Part A, and then I'll try to stop and take some questions in just a minute. Here's the crux of this. Every year you're required to develop an annual Title I Part A plan. The plan at the LEA level is submitted through the Utah Grants Management System. The plan is what rules everything that you do. And the rule is both LEAs as well as Title I schools have to plan first based on what your identified needs are. Then you apply your Title I funding. You do not view the funding as, oh, I have this pot of money. What could I think of to spend this money on? Okay, that's going at the whole thing backward. You need to plan first based on needs, then you apply your funding to see how you can best leverage that funding to meet the goals of your plan, always going back to that statutory purpose of the Title I program. The Title I plans are due annually in the Utah grants system. They're due by November 1st. We hope to have the applications open in the next couple of weeks. By the first part of September, you will receive notifications when your funding is available in Utah grants for you to apply. For those of you that filled out the Title I-A plan in Utah grants last year, you can review that plan, and if there are areas where you need to update it or you feel like you can improve it, you're free to do that. You don't have to start from square one and redesign the whole thing every single year. If you're coming on as a new LEA into Title I, then you'll have to, work to develop that initial plan. And we are always here and ready to support you in any way that we possibly can. When the Title I-A plans are developed each year, you have to include feedback and meaningful input with principals, other school leaders, teachers, paraeducators, parents that represent the students that the Title I program in your LEA serves, specialized instructional personnel, special educators, and others. If you're in a charter LEA, you need to make sure the appropriate charter school leaders are involved. And if you serve schools that serve a large percentage of students who are American Indian students, you need to have some involvement from tribal leaders as well. It's also important that you think not of Title I as a siloed program that stands alone, but think about it in concert with the other title programs. So Title II, which is in our agency, is housed in the teaching and learning section, which provides money for professional learning for teachers and leaders. So how do you leverage that? McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act. Jeff Ojeda is our wonderful homeless education specialist. He's always willing and available to help support you in what kinds of services can be provided to students that meet the definition of homelessness. There's the Rehabilitation Act, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, CTE, the WIOA, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, Head Start, adult education, and others. So you don't think of it as a silo, but it's part of your overall system of support that you're providing to schools and to students. There are a number of required provisions that need to go into a Title I plan. So the first one is, how are you going to monitor the student's progress in meeting the state's rigorous academic standards? And you can look at those bullets there about some of the things that go into that. But it should always be a cycle of continuous improvement at the school level, at the LEA level, as well as at the state level. And we're so excited, I said, to have Tracy Vandeventer, because she's going to work with us at our agency to make sure that what we're doing as a state is supportive of what you do at the local level in supporting your schools, so that schools aren't viewing various programs and funding streams as standalone silo types of programs where they have a Title I plan and they have a special ed plan and they have a literacy plan and they have a trust lands plan and maybe a digital teaching and learning plan. All of that needs to come together so it's systemic and meaningful and it's not fragmented for our most disadvantaged children. Here are some of the other provisions. Specifically, how will the LEA ensure that children coming from low-income families, children who are minority students, are not in a situation where they have teachers who are ineffective or inexperienced or teaching out of their field of study at higher rates than other students across the LEA. You will have to determine what poverty criteria you are going to use to identify which schools in your LEA will receive services. If you have students that are living in institutions or day school or attending day school programs because they are neglected and delinquent students, they qualify for youth in custody programs, youth in care. How are you going to ensure that those students are receiving the services that they need? And again, making sure that students who are experiencing homelessness are allowed to enroll in school, attend school, that they're being provided with what they need to be successful. And then again, the importance of meaningful, evidence-based parent and family engagement strategies and activities. Again, you have to identify how you're going to support, coordinate, and integrate what you're doing with your Title I-A program, as well as other early childhood education programs. So if you have children attending Head Start programs or other preschool programs, or you're using some of your Title I funding to support preschool programs in your Title I schools, how are you going to make sure that that's integrated so that when those children enter kindergarten and first grade, that transition is a smooth one? If you have schools that are targeted assistance programs, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, how are you going to identify which children and youth are eligible for those services? Because it's based on their academic risk, not their poverty status. And then again with transitions, how will you ensure that children have successful transitions from the elementary school into middle and junior high, and from the middle grades into high school, from high school into post-secondary or career opportunities? And how will the LEA make sure that discipline practices that remove students from the classroom are minimized as much as they possibly can be? So let's pause there for a minute, and I'm going to ask Tracy to let me know, because I can't see the chat in my view, if there are any questions to this point in time.
Thanks for checking in. Right now, Becky, there's no questions in our chat.
All right, thank you, Tracy. We'll move on. So there are a lot of requirements in Title I-A and across all of the programs that are part of the Elementary Secondary Education Act, which is now the Every Student Succeeds Act. Parent engagement is a requirement of all those programs. So for Title I, the LEA must develop and keep updated a parent engagement policy. If your LEA receives $500,000 a year or more in Title I funding, you are required to set aside a minimum of 1% of that funding for parent engagement activities. So you will have a parent engagement policy. Also, the schools will have a school parent compact. So there's a policy that exists at the LEA level, but there are also provisions that apply at the school level. Title I schools are required each year to hold an annual meeting And that can be part of a back to school or open house. There's a variety of ways that can occur. But the school principal needs to make sure that the parents of the students attending that school are aware that that school is receiving Title I funding and what the school is using that funding for. Again, going back to that statutory purpose, how are they going to improve student achievement and close achievement gaps and make sure all students are receiving equitable access to services and receiving a high quality, well-rounded educational program. Because we're in this very dystopian situation right now with the pandemic, school principals will need to be creative. So they may hold their meeting virtually with parents. They could hold that meeting virtually, excuse me, and record that like we're recording this webinar this morning and then posting that on their school website, sending a link out to parents who may not have been able to attend the webinar when it was being held live. But they'll have to be creative this year in how they do that. But that is required that they do that on an annual basis. So I know when I was a teacher and I was working as an instructional coach, my principal would hold that at the very beginning of the back to school night, and she would, introduce, welcome parents. And then one of the first things she did after she introduced the faculty and staff was talk about Title I and what achievement the school had made the previous school year and what the plans were during that current school year to make sure that those things occurred. There are some requirements around parents' right to know, and we'll go a little bit more depth in that on the next slide. And again, parents need input into the planning and implementation of parent engagement activities. If it's not something that's meaningful to parents, if these activities are held at times when parents are not available to participate, if there are parents from minority populations that don't feel like they're a part of this school community, those are things that prevent parents from really engaging in a meaningful way that will really help them in supporting their children. Parents need access to assessment and evaluation data. They need to know how the school is performing and, what the school is going to do to improve. And if the school is in improvement status, parents need to be notified of that at the beginning of each school year, that the school is in that status. So let's talk a little bit more about what those parents' rights are. If a parent comes to the school and asks what the qualifications are of their children's teachers, then that needs to be provided. So parents need to be aware, does the teacher have a degree? What are their qualifications? Are they licensed by the state? They have that right if they request it. If a classroom is going to be taught by a substitute teacher or a teacher who does not meet state licensure requirements, and that's going to occur for 4 weeks or more due to a teacher perhaps being out on extended sick leave or maternity leave, something like that, parents have to be notified. Mrs. Johnson is going to be out for the next several weeks. We are going to have Mr. Johnson will be substituting. Mr. Johnson is a licensed teacher. He retired last year, whatever, so that parents are aware. But if the teacher is not going to be a licensed teacher, certainly you need to make parents aware of that. And again, if a school has been identified for improvement under ESSA, which is Comprehensive Support and Improvement, or CSI, or targeted support and improvement for low-performing student groups, or they've been identified for state school turnaround, parents must be notified of that. And again, they have to be notified on an annual basis until the school has exited improvement status. So let's talk a little bit about Title I schools and the two types of programs schools can operate and what makes a school eligible for Title I funding. So eligibility. Under the federal statute, a school is eligible to receive Title I funds under the following conditions. The percentage of low-income children in a school is at least 35% or higher than the LEA's average percent of poverty. So if the LEA does not have an average of 35% poverty, maybe the LEA's average is 30%, then in order to serve a school with Title I, that LEA could not serve any school that has less than 30% poverty. And what this means is we have a lot of schools across the state of Utah that are eligible. Many schools in traditional school districts have poverty rates over 35%. But districts have to make decisions about how far they can spread their Title I funding. So they have to decide where they're going to cut that line and say, all the schools above this poverty level will receive Title I money and all the schools under this rate will not be funded. And those are decisions made at the local level. Charter schools, the rule is a little bit different. A charter school must have at least 10 children who meet the definition of low income, and the percentage of low-income students at the charter school has to be at least 5% of the school population. In Utah, low-income students are typically identified by the October 1 data submission to the state, which indicates which students have the status of economically disadvantaged. However, when the district decides which schools they're going to fund, there are some other ways that they can do that. And we'll talk more about that at our September meeting. But one of the things you have to decide as a Title I director with your LEA leadership is you have to rank and serve your schools. So you have to rank all schools if you're in a traditional district or multi-school charter LEA. You have to rank order all of your schools by poverty level from your highest poverty school to your lowest. Any school that has 75% poverty or higher must be served with Title I, regardless of the grade span. So many LEAs choose to target their funding to their elementary schools, and they don't fund high schools, and they may not fund many middle or junior high schools. They feel like it's better to target and concentrate their money for the elementary grade span. But if that LEA had a secondary school that had 75% poverty or higher, the LEA would have to serve that school. So then you rank order your schools by that poverty. Once you've served any schools that have 75% of poverty or above, then you can decide whether or not you want to serve specific grade spans, for example, focusing on your elementary schools. You can serve any schools with the poverty rate at 35% above or higher than the LEA's poverty rate, as long as you have sufficient funds. So this again is a decision you have to make about how far do you want to spread those funds out. You want to give enough funds to an individual school that it can make a meaningful difference for students. So if you just say, well, we're going to serve every school in our district, we have, 20 schools, all of those schools have at least 35% poverty, or they're all above the poverty rate of the LEA. We're just going to give every school funding. You may spread your funding out so thin that your highest poverty schools really aren't going to get an adequate amount of funding to really make a difference for students. So here's an example of a Title I eligibility worksheet. So we have 5 elementary schools listed here. And this district is the up and coming district. The average poverty rate for the district as a whole is 47.3%. So you can see they've listed their schools in rank order by poverty, and they are serving Adams, Butler, and Cliffside. Drake Elementary does not meet the 35% threshold or the district average poverty threshold. Everett Elementary is well below either of those numbers. So those two schools will not be served with Title I. So this LEA is going to concentrate their Title I funding in those first three elementaries that are their higher poverty schools. You'll notice another thing that this LEA did. In the second column here, or the third column, you see the number of students who are from low-income families. The district determines a per pupil allocation to give to each of these schools. So Adams Elementary is their highest poverty. It's close to that 75% must be served. So they are going to give Adams Elementary $650 per student, per their low-income students, and that will determine Adams Elementary's allocation of $107,250. Butler Elementary's poverty rate is about 10% less than Adams, so the LEA lowered their per pupil allocation by $50. Butler has more students who are from low-income families, so they actually get more Title I, but the per pupil allocation was adjusted based on that poverty rate. And then Cliffside Elementary, again, it drops down another 11% or so underneath Butler. So the district, again, reduced the per pupil allocation to $500 to allocate funding out to Cliffside Elementary. Let's talk about funding schools and the provision of equal versus equitable. They're not the same thing. So LEA over here on the left side of the screen decided they were going to just divvy their Title I money up equally. So their per pupil allocation is $1,000 per low income student. And so you can see there that school number 1 has a 90% poverty rate. School number 7 has a 40% poverty rate. But because the LEA is decided to give every school a per pupil allocation of $1,000, they're funding the schools on an equal basis, but it's not equitable. Because I would venture that school number 1 with 90% poverty is going to have greater needs than school number 7 that has a poverty rate of 40%. LEA-B on the right-hand side chose to differentiate their PPA a little bit. So you can see they have 3 high poverty, really high poverty schools. Schools 1, 2, and 3 are all at 75% or higher. So they're going to give those schools $1,000 per each student from a low-income family. But then they gradually taper that down, and they've done it in sort of bands. So you've got school 4 and 5 that are somewhat similar. You've got 70%, 65%, but they dropped the per pupil allocation down to $800 per student. And then the 2 schools at the bottom of the rank order with 50% and 40%, they dropped it again just a little bit to $675. That's more equitable as opposed to just being equal. So as you fill out your Title I applications this year in Utah grants, you will fill out a form, and we're going to be doing another webinar in September that will walk you through that application process. We'll bring this up again, but I'd really like you to consider that and think about it. Whether you want to be equal or if you really want to be equitable, because in the law, remember, it says equitable. So there are 2 types of Title I school programs. Schoolwide programs, these schools have to have a minimum of 40% poverty. And in a case where there's a school-wide program, every student attending the school is eligible for Title I services. So this model has much greater flexibility. But there is the minimum poverty threshold. Targeted assistance programs are designed to provide services to students who have been identified as the most academically at risk, regardless of their family's income level. So it's the number of students from low-income families that will determine how much funding a targeted assistance school gets. But once the money is given to the school has to target their services to students that are the most academically at-risk students. So there may be a student on that list that comes from a family within that school boundary that has the highest income. But if they are the most at-risk student, they would be eligible for services. Likewise, there may be students in a targeted assistance school who come from low-income families, but are doing well and do not need to be provided with these services. So the low-income percentage determines the funding, but the student's academic risk determines who receives the services. So let's talk a little bit more now about targeted assistance schools and what specific requirements those schools have. If a school is in the first year, it's a brand new school that the LEA just built, or it's a school that has less than 40% poverty, they are required to operate a targeted assistance program. If the school is a new school and it has 40% poverty or higher, during that first year that they operate as a targeted assistance school, they need to engage in a needs assessment. They need to bring in all of those stakeholders we talked about earlier to develop a school-wide plan that is then submitted to us at the state, and we review those and approve them. But in a targeted assistance program, again, the funds are supplementary and they are provided to eligible students. And those students are those who are most at risk of failing to achieve state academic standards, primarily in reading, language arts, math, could be science. So you have to prioritize that list of students, and you would use multiple data points. So you may have some, regular assessment data that you're gathering. Maybe it's a cadence reading data. You have end of level data. Maybe you have LEA interim benchmark assessments. Teachers have informal classroom assessments. But you look at multiple data points to identify those students who are most at risk, and you rank those students, and then you serve as many of those students as you feel you can with the amount of money that you receive. If a student is receiving services and they get to the point where they've responded well to, excuse me, to the supplemental services they're receiving, and you feel that that student can move on and they don't need the Title I services at that point in time, that student can exit Title I and you can pull in the next student on the list that needs support. So eligible students include all of these students that you see here. So those students at risk on meeting academic standards, if a student attended Head Start or a preschool program that was funded with Title I funds, they are categorically eligible. Students who are from families that are involved in migratory agricultural work or migratory fishing work, those students are categorically eligible in a targeted assistance school. Students that are identified for neglected and delinquent services are categorically eligible, as are homeless students, students who are in foster care, and students with disabilities. And we've had calls over the years where schools that are doing target assistance will call and say, we have a child who has an IEP. They're receiving support through special education, receiving services to meet the needs identified on their IEP. But the parent also wants them to participate in Title I. But we feel like that child's already getting services from special education, so we don't want to include them in Title I. Those students, if they're at some of your most at-risk students, are eligible for Title I services. You cannot deny a student Title I services just because they have an IEP and are receiving services through special education in some format. So you have to establish your patterns and schedule of services. Title I services in a target assistance school should be provided at a time when children are not pulled out of their regular Tier 1 core instruction. So Title I services do not replace Tier 1. It's always in addition to, supplemental, not in place of. There's a targeted assistance checklist. I have a link to that on a later slide. It's also available on our website. If you are a district LEA that has private schools and there are students attending the private school that would reside within the boundary of one of your Title I schools, and that private school, you consult with the private school and they want to participate in equitable services, the LEA would provide services to the private school, but the private school can never operate a school-wide program. They can only operate a targeted assistance program. And again, they would have to identify students that are most at risk and provide the services that the district is providing on behalf of that private school be provided to those students that are most at risk. What about staff qualifications in targeted assistance schools? Teachers must all meet state licensing requirements. That's a requirement under ESSA. Paraeducators in a targeted assistance school who are being paid fully or in part with Title I funds have to meet the following requirements. They always have to have a high school diploma plus one of those other three items. They either have to have an associate's degree, 48 semester hours of college credit, or a passing score on the Praxis Parapro exam or a similar type of exam. Are there questions that you have at this point about targeted assistance schools?
Hey, Becky, there's no questions in the chat at this time.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. So let's talk about school-wide programs. Again, in order to operate a school-wide Title I program, the school must have a minimum poverty rate of 40%. Sometimes LEAs will have schools that maybe were above 40% and then a new subdivision is built and the poverty rate maybe drops to 38 or 39%. But the LEA said, well, we aren't sure what's going to happen in the future. So in that case, we can grandfather those schools in for 1 year. We have a waiver process that we aren't going to get into that today, but we can grandfather them in for 1 year as a school-wide school. But if that poverty rate stays below 40%, the school is going to have to revert to a targeted assistance program. Schools must create a school-wide Title I plan that integrates the results of a comprehensive needs assessment and includes school-wide reform strategies. Because again, in a school-wide school, your Title I funds and services, every student in the school is eligible. Every teacher and every staff member can benefit from the Title I services. So it takes 1 year to develop that. So that's why if you open a new campus, even if that campus, comes in and on October 1, their poverty rate maybe is 50% or 60% or 45%, they still have to start the first year as a targeted assistance program while they spend that year in consultation with teachers, parents, LEA leaders, community members developing that school-wide plan to meet the needs of that building. As I said before, school-wide plans, school-wide schools have much greater flexibility in how they use their Title I funds. And for example, in a targeted assistance school, if the school chose to use some of its Title I money to purchase, say, some iPads, those iPads can be used to serve those students that are eligible for Title I services. They can't be used across the entire school. Okay, so those are the kind of things you have to consider. There is a school-wide planning template, and as I said, I have a link on a later slide, and that's also on our website. There's also school-wide guidance from the U.S. Department of Education that we will make available to you. So there are 4 key components of a school-wide plan. First, the plan has to be based on a comprehensive needs assessment. And every school is different. So the needs of Poplar Elementary are not going to be the same as, Cedar Elementary. They're in 2 different locations in the district. Their student population is different. So you can't just have this generic plan that you apply across all schools. Every school and every school community has specific needs. The plan has to address school-wide reform strategies. Title I is all about improving education for students, closing achievement gaps. So what kinds of school-wide reform strategies will that school implement? And you're looking at evidence-based practices and strategies. How will you ensure students, especially the students within that school-wide school that are your most at-risk population, how are you going to ensure that those students master the standards, the state standards at their grade level? And then you need to consider how you're going to coordinate and integrate all of the funding streams coming into the building. So again, there shouldn't be a separate Title I plan, a separate trust lands plan, a separate literacy plan, a separate this plan. Nobody can pay attention to multiple plans, multiple masters. So how do all those plans work together systemically to improve the entire school? And as I said, you will submit a plan for a newly designated school-wide school to us for approval. We'll give you feedback. Sometimes school-wide plans are submitted and they are not ready. And we may have to say, you know what? This plan really isn't there yet. You've got to tweak a number of areas. So continue next year as a targeted assistance program and, reach out to us for help, but we'll continue working with you on the development of that plan. When LEAs are going to have a monitoring visit, and there are some LEAs each year that are selected for on-site monitoring, every district, every LEA participates every year in a desktop monitoring process. Then we have to review a sample of what those school-wide plans are in that LEA. And we would also go out and visit schools as part of that. As I said, this year, primarily these visits are going to be virtual. Okay, staff qualifications. This is really important, especially when we get to paraeducators. So again, teachers must meet state licensing requirements. And that's something that Val will check. She'll check in Canvas and she will contact LEAs to say, this Title I school, there are 3 teachers that currently do not meet licensing standards. What is the LEA, what is the school doing to make sure that those teachers can meet those standards? Paraeducators working in a school-wide school must all meet those requirements with the high school diploma plus an associate's degree or 48 semester hours of college credit or a passing score on the praxis exam or a similar exam. In a school-wide school, because the entire school benefits from the Title I funding, all instructional paraeducators must meet that requirement. This is where it gets tricky because paraeducators under special education are not held to that standard. I don't know why they aren't. I think they should be, but they aren't. But if they're working in a Title I school-wide school, they have to meet those requirements unless they fall into one of these categories. Every paraprofessional at the very minimum must have a high school diploma, but if a paraeducator is hired to do only one of these three types of things, these three bullets, they don't have to meet one of those other criteria. If all they are doing is serving as someone who is working with parents as a parent liaison, working in parent engagement, and that is all they do, they are not engaging in any instructional activities with students, a high school diploma will suffice. If they are hired to provide translation services for parents, and that is all they are doing, then a high school diploma suffices. If they are hired to serve a student with a disability or a special need, and they are providing personal care or other kinds of non-instructional care for that student, then they don't have to meet that higher standard. But other than that, every paraeducator in a school-wide program, whether or not you are paying them with Title I funds or some other funding stream, must have the diploma plus either the college credit, an associate's degree, or they pass an exam. Any questions about that? Because this issue comes up every year.
Hey, Becky, we actually have 5 different questions all coming in from Aaron Wilson, and some take us back just a little bit. So I'm going to go back to the earliest question that he put forward, which is talking about school level meeting. And the question is there a written list of required components to address in that school level meeting? And I think he's referring to the notification requirements in Title I.
Yes, and I think Val can provide additional guidance on that when she gets to her slides. But yeah, it has to be annual. You have to make sure the parents know the school is receiving Title I funding, how that funding is being used to improve achievement, close achievement gaps, how those services are provided, that kind of thing.
And maybe we could send out that list to all the Title I directors just as a reminder so everyone has an updated list.
Yes, thank you, Tracy, and that'll be great to remind us of that.
Question 2, there's a question on targeted assistance.
Okay.
The private schools over which we are LEA are targeted assistance. And Aaron is assuming classroom sets of textbooks are not allowable to purchase because they benefit the entire class. But often buying a classroom set is only slightly more expensive than buying only textbooks or whatever educational materials than for just those in poverty. If the need is initiated by targeted students, can items be purchased for the larger class?
No, because the targeted assistance program only benefits those students that are most at risk. And this is often confusing as well to our private school officials, because sometimes they think that the LEA can send money to them, which is never a possibility, or that the LEA can do something to upgrade their entire school program. But no, they can only operate a targeted assistance program, and that's the same requirements that a regular district LEA targeted assistance school would have to meet.
Perfect. Question 3, a question about supervising paras in targeted assistance schools. Are they supervised by the private school staff?
They would have to be, yeah, they would have to be under the supervision of, a licensed teacher. So, they would be, I would assume they would be working with the teachers at that private school that would indicate, what additional help specific students might need in math or literacy or, science, whatever they were being asked to do. And I know in some cases, we have some large district LEAs that hire teachers who are licensed teachers that have retired from the district, and then they are hired to go in and they actually provide those services at the private school. So they're actually, an employee of the actual district LEA.
Okay. Question 4, can LEAs make some changes to the school-wide planning template, namely adding more requirements?
Yes, those 4 components are the minimum. So the plan has to address those 4 components that are in the law. But certainly in LEA, if there are specific areas of focus that the LEA wants to make sure that schools are incorporating in their plans, yes, that's just kind of the minimum, the plan template. And Val and I are going to be working on updating and upgrading that plan template as well. That was our first attempt when ESSA went into place. And as we've worked with a number of schools that have worked through that, we know there are some improvements we can make on that template. And LEAs aren't required to use our template as long as, like I said, as long as they incorporate those 4 components. So that's fine, Erin. That's a great question.
The last question that we have is, are the requirements for supervision of paras the same for paras serving in the targeted assistant private schools?
Oh, I think we'd answered that one, didn't we? Yeah, they would have to be under,
make sure.
yeah, they would have to be under the supervision of a teacher.
Okay.
And that's the case always, in any Title I school. If there's a paraeducator in a school-wide school or a targeted assistance, they would work under the direction of a teacher who's, so the parapro on their own isn't just determining what kind of curriculum they're going to use and what they're going to work on, but coordinating with what's happening in the child's Tier 1 instruction so that they can provide additional support.
Excellent. And Erin's indicated that has answered all his questions at this time. So thanks for the break for your questions, Becky.
Thanks for those great questions, Erin. I appreciate you asking those. So here are some things that paraprofessionals can do that are allowable under Title I. So of course they can tutor students as long as that supplemental instruction, they can help with Tier 2 interventions as long as that occurs outside of Tier 1 instruction. So we don't ever want to pull a child out of Tier 1 instruction with their classroom teacher to go out and get supplemental instruction. They can assist with classroom management tasks. They can be hired to manage a computer lab in a school-wide school. They can certainly assist with parent and family engagement activities. They can provide support in a media center. Again, if it's a school-wide school, the parapro can, help with the library media center. They can serve as a translator for parents and families. And again, they can provide instructional services to students, and this goes along with the tutoring if that occurs under the supervision of the classroom teacher. So it's always aligned with what's happening in the regular classroom. Professional learning is an important part of Title I, and so in the school plans as well as in the LEA plan, you should be considering the types of professional learning opportunities that will be provided to teachers, but also to paraeducators and parents and leaders. What professional learning is being provided to instructional coaches. Many of our schools use some of their Title I funds to support instructional coaches, and what kind of ongoing professional learning opportunities are they being provided with? So it should be ongoing, not just, the drive-by, one-time, fun professional learning activities that everybody's like, oh, that was really fun. And then everyone goes back to their classrooms and just carries on as usual. So there should be expectations set by school leaders as regarding implementation. Coaches should be part of that professional learning so they can provide that ongoing coaching and support and follow up in professional learning communities. Again, we're going to talk about the evidence-based requirements of ESSA on an upcoming slide. And then in Utah, I'm going to go on to the next slide. Utah has 8 professional learning standards that are actually in state code. So this comes out of our teaching and learning and educator effectiveness team at USBE. Some of these standards were initially developed by the Learning Forward Association that used to be ASCD. So they developed 7 of those, and in Utah, they added the 8th one, which is technology. So again, that's in state code. It's just not something nice to know. It's a requirement. So improving student achievement, we need to make sure that Tier 1 instruction is delivered by effective teachers. Tier 1 instruction is so critical in our Title I schools, and often I visit Title I schools, and I've done this for over 20 years now in a variety of positions that I've held in my career. And I go into schools and they have multiple intervention programs going, but they've never really addressed the quality of the Tier 1 instruction. That's what's most important. Every student needs equitable access to high quality Tier 1 instruction so that we don't have an inverted triangle where, all the kids are, at risk, and then Tier 1's the small pointed end of the triangle. Tier 1 needs to come first. So you've got to improve your Tier 1 before you start implementing millions of interventions. Make sure that you're, using ongoing assessment, both formal and informal assessment data, to really hone in on where your students are at a given point. If they're not responding to instruction, then what is the reason they're not responding? What needs to be tweaked or improved to make sure they get that? And then targeted interventions for students who need that additional supplemental instructional support. We also have students in our Title I schools that are very advanced students. They need opportunities to have enrichment. They need opportunities to participate in gifted and talented programs. If they're in a secondary school that's receiving Title I money, they need access to AP coursework and IB coursework and concurrent enrollment classes. And then schools should review their academic progress each year at the end of the year to say, okay, this is where we started, this is where we ended, and they need to start thinking about what are we going to do next year to be in that continuous cycle of improvement. We never really arrive. It's a journey. And in our team, the team that I work with at the state office, we always talk about we're on the road to excellence, but it's really not a destination. It's a journey, and we're on that journey every single day. And everything we do, we try to think about it through that lens of how will this benefit students? And if it's not going to benefit students, we shouldn't be doing it, and we shouldn't be spending time and effort and energy and stress and money on it. Okay, one of the things I told you happened when ESSA was signed into law by President Obama in December of 2015. Congress realized there was a need to put in some requirements that schools and school districts start implementing what evidence shows actually works. not just doing the same old, just spending money on the same thing we've done for 20 years. So a couple of years ago at the National ESEA conference, Dr. Robert Slavin, who is a professor and a researcher at Johns Hopkins University, gave a really wonderful session. And he said, you know what? We have to stop this pendulum swing in public education. I want to get off. I hope some of you want to get off. So he pointed out things like there are certain fields in the United States that don't have any real need or respect any use of evidence. For example, fashion. Fashion comes and goes, right? So if you look back at family pictures, it's like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking with that haircut back in the 70s? Oh my word, look at that horrible 6th grade picture. What? I have these horrible, ugly cat lady glasses that were just horrible. Why did my parents make me wear those glasses? Art's the same way. Art, it evolves, and we have these periods of art where, certain things were the thing that all the artists and the painters were trying to do, whether it was impressionism or, pointillism or, various things that we've gone through. Education, unfortunately, has been one of those fields. So what we rely on is word of mouth. A few years ago, I was working with a school that was involved in a major federal improvement initiative dealing with literacy. And I went into the school, I went in and did regular visits each year, and I went into the school and I was talking with the principal, and I really loved this principal. She was just a lovely person. But she said, oh, I have to tell you, we're implementing XYZ. And I said, what? And she said, oh, yeah, I talked to this other person from this other district. It was a far more, she was talking to someone from an affluent school. That school didn't look anything at all like her school. It was in a different district than this one I'm talking about. And she said, oh, the principal just raved about this XYZ. That program was not going to meet the needs of the kids in her school. But she heard about it word of mouth, and she was just dead certain that this principal over here in this part of the state said it was awesome, and so she was going to do it at her school. So that was the time when I had to really manage my poker face. Another thing is tradition. Oh, we've always done it this way. We've always spent our Title I money on this. We spent it this way for 20 years. We don't want to do it a different way. Our school's always been organized this way. Not effective. Politics gets involved. We know how that goes all the time. We have policymakers at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level that, get a bee in their bonnet and say, oh, well, this is the new best thing, and everybody's got to jump on this bandwagon. And sometimes there's not a shred of evidence that that's something that we should be doing and spending our time and money and effort on. So I really appreciated Dr. Slavin in his presentation saying, this has got to stop. So we need to start thinking about what is the return on investment. The U.S. Department of Education issued a guidance document about using evidence to strengthen education investments. This is another thing. Policymakers get mad when they give us money and then we don't get results. And then they say, oh, well, we gave you all that money. We're going to take that money away. And maybe it's because we were, implementing something they said we had to do that had no evidence. But evidence-based reform happens on a regular basis in medicine. If I had to have a joint replacement done, I would be researching, surgeons that know how to do that. I don't want to go to a surgeon that's never done that before. Agriculture is constantly, how can we produce, a higher yield in our crops? Engineering, they are constantly moving on as new evidence becomes available. They're in that loop of continuous progressive improvement. So as educators, we need to do the same thing. We need to evaluate the needs of our students and then look for proven interventions, strategies, practices, and programs to meet those needs, and not just, oh, well, my friend that teaches in this other school said this was really awesome, or I saw an ad on social media advertising this thing. We've got to stop doing that. So here are the definition of evidence-based in ESSA, and you can look at that document that I linked on the other slide. But level 1 means there's strong evidence for that practice, strategy, whatever it is. It has a statistically significant effect on improving student outcomes. Typically, that level of evidence is only going to be found through well-designed and well-implemented experimental studies. And unfortunately, in the field of education, we don't have a lot of studies that are going to meet that criteria. Level 2 is moderate evidence. So we have quasi-experimental studies. Level 3 is promising. These are correlational studies, and we do have a lot of correlational studies in education. But we have to be careful as we look at that to make sure that the researchers doing the study control for selection bias. And then level 4 is research that might be based on an evolving theory. There might be some positive outcomes that seem to be happening, but it hasn't really been validated through a research study at one of those higher levels. But you should be implementing things in those levels. Everything you do, you should be, looking through that lens again. For schools that receive any Title I school improvement money, they cannot spend those school improvement dollars from Title I on anything below level 3. If they want to implement something that's at level 4 and they want to include a level 4 practice in their plan, they can do that, but they cannot spend their school improvement Title I funds on that. So researchers across the country, really celebrated when this guidance came out, because we really have an opportunity to focus these limited federal education dollars. We have limited state education and local education dollars on things that really have, some effectiveness behind them. And again, this should not be a question of, how do I just check off a box to say, oh yeah, I'm going to implement this one thing because I'm in school improvement and I want to make sure I'm compliant. It really should be, how can we use evidence to improve student outcomes? So here are some links to some important resources. So the first link will take you to our main web page where you can find information and resources on Title I, as well as the other programs that my team supervises. So we have Title III through Dr. Christelle Estrada. We have migrant education and homeless education that Jeff Ojeda oversees. We have Title I school improvement with Max Lang and Leslie Evans, and now Tracy and I. State school turnaround is also on our website there. We have 21st century community learning centers that Camille Sheik oversees, as well as high quality program opportunities for after school programs. Robert Palmer oversees the intergenerational poverty grants and the partnerships for student success. So all of that information you will find if you go to that web page, and there are tabs where you can go to those other sections. The second one I really want to call your attention to. A couple of years ago when I became, or 2 or 3, I don't know how many years it's been now, maybe 4 years, when I became the Title I state coordinator, I realized that we really needed to have a program and fiscal handbook. So this is something that we put a lot of time and effort into. It has footnotes that link to the federal statute, to guidance documents. You need to become familiar with that handbook. It's got a lot of really good information. So if you have questions about, now, what were those qualifications of a paraeducator? And which paraeducators don't have to meet those qualifications? There's information in there. How do I rank order my schools? How does that work? That information's in there. What are allowable expenditures? What are unallowable? There's a whole list of things that Title I money cannot be spent on. So that handbook should become your right-hand best friend. Bookmark it, print it out if you have access to a printer in your virtual situation, or if you're back in your building. I know some Title I directors have it printed, they have it tabbed with, Post-it notes and everything for different sections, and then they look at it frequently. And then if you still have questions, we're always available to answer your questions. You can email us or call us at any time, and we will always respond very quickly. But if you can't reach one of us, or, you get an out of office message on our email, go to the handbook. And sometimes that will give you the information that you need right at that time when you really need it. We have a one-page side-by-side comparison between targeted assistance and school-wide programs. It's kind of a handy resource just on one page. We have the school-wide Title I template, and then there's a checklist for a targeted assistance plan, targeted assistance checklist. It's not really a plan, it's a checklist of, things that a targeted assistance program would need to be aware of. These are upcoming dates that you'll want to put on your calendars. Our next Title I directors meeting will be Wednesday, September 23rd. It will be either over WebEx or Zoom. We were told, Jerry Record told us yesterday that our agency is going to be implementing a contract with Zoom. And so it'll be over one of those platforms, either WebEx or Zoom. We'll hold our Title I meeting in the morning, and then in the afternoon, Val Murdoch will present a training on the desktop monitoring instrument. She'll talk a little bit more about that in her section this morning. We will also be doing another Title I directors meeting on November 18th. The National ESEA Conference, their theme this year is Educating for Tomorrow. And wow, wasn't that a great theme? They chose that theme before the pandemic hit, but I think whoever chose that theme was inspired, because we are in such a different place right now than we were, last February when the conference was held in Atlanta. Things have changed dramatically. So that conference will be Monday, February 8th through Thursday, February 11th. All of it will be virtual. So that will save on travel costs, and we're hoping that it'll allow additional people to attend. So there's a link there to the conference website. I sent out information as well yesterday morning. If you register before September 30th and you're registering a team, you save $100 per person on the registration fee. And then we have a spring Title I directors meeting that will be on Wednesday, March 17th. In the meantime, when we get the Title I program opened up in Utah grants, we'll do a short webinar then to walk you through the parts of the application, which will be really helpful, especially to those of you that are new. So you know which forms you have to fill out. Some have to be downloaded, saved to your computer, filled out, and then uploaded. Other ones are forms that are right in the system. We'll walk you through all of that, talk to you more about the equitable services for private nonprofit schools. But if at any time, like I said, if you need any help, you can always call on us. So I'm going to stop again before we move into the school improvement section to see if we have any additional questions, Tracy.
No questions at this time. Thank you, Becky.
All right, we're going to move on then, and I'm going to turn things over to Max Lang and Leslie Cummings, and they will be back there to turn off my mic.
And just a quick question, Becky, will Leslie and I have the ability to forward the slides, or do we need to ask you to forward the slides for us?
I can forward the slides.
Okay. So good morning, friends. It's good to sort of see you. My name is Max Lang, and I work for the State Board of Education. I work as a specialist for school improvement. Today, you know what, I'm going to pause and see if Leslie's available to introduce herself before I go on.
Hi, Max. Yes, I'm available. I don't want to provide feedback.
Yeah, I'll turn my camera off as well. So I want to take the opportunity today to talk about school improvement, some of the updates that are going on. So we'll provide kind of an overview briefly to set the context of what has happened or what are the requirements under Title I school improvement, and then talk about some of the things that have been happening and what we know, keeping in mind that it's an ever-changing process and that there are still a number of things that are unknown. So Utah is a state that implements 2 school improvement initiatives. Utah implements under Title I, under ESSA, school improvement with its various categories of school improvement. And Utah also implements a state initiative called the School Turnaround and Leadership Development Act. So just for some of those terms for context, there are 2 categories of comprehensive support and improvement. We call them CSI. You've probably heard them called CSI. The first one is a Title I identification. These are the lowest 5% of Title I schools, the rank order, lowest 5%, averaged over 3 years. The other category is any public high school with a 67% graduation rate or lower for 3 years on average. So these schools were identified for the first time in Utah for CSI in 18-19 school year. We identified 18 Title I schools in CSI and 17 public high schools for CSI for graduation rate. The other category of school improvement under ESSA is called Targeted Support and Improvement, or TSI. And this is specific to student groups. So the identification under TSI is for 2 consecutive years, any of a school's student group that falls under the percentage of points associated with the lowest performing 5% of schools in the state accountability system. So if you think of each student group, N size 10 or larger in your school as its own little school in comparison to all the schools in the state, if that student group falls below that 5% cut for all schools in the state, then the school would be identified for TSI. That's an annual identification where CSI is once every 3 years. And then if you'll go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the comparisons here. One of the things that the state board pursued is that although we're continuing to implement a state school turnaround initiative and federal school improvement, that moving forward, they would all be held under one accountability system. So the state accountability system is the measure for all of these schools. A state turnaround, which I didn't define in the previous slide, is the lowest performing 3% of all schools for 2 consecutive years. So one of the things the board also approved is that if a school is identified for state school turnaround, it's one of those bottom 3%, be identified for CSI and vice versa. If a school is identified and currently going through the process in CSI, they wouldn't be double identified for state school turnaround. And I see that there is a question, so I'll pause. The question is, TSA qualifying groups include English learners, students with disabilities, low SES, student demographic groups also included in TSI categories. There's a whole list, but I mean, Aaron, we can probably get back to you with every group that's in. I don't have it available. Leslie, do you know off the top of your head?
Yes, all the student groups listed by ethnic group are included in the TSI categories. So American Indian, Black, Asian, you know, all the different.
Thank you. Okay, so that's where we were in the identification of schools in the 2 initiatives for school improvement in the state of Utah. And the next slide. So if you've been playing along, I'll talk a little bit about this, the extension. So when schools were identified in 1819, each year, the state is required to take a portion of its Title I funds for the state to be used for school improvement. Well, Utah didn't identify its first round of CSI and TSI schools until 1819, meaning we had 1 year where we had set aside funds for school improvement. So we applied as a state for a waiver to extend those funds, and we were awarded that waiver. So you can see that first thing. So, you know, there's a set of funds there that will be extended. So it's, I think, in the category I'll mention in the next slide, in Utah grants. There you go, Utah grants. Those are the categories in there and their due dates. That one there, 18T1SF, as it's listed in Utah grants, we got that extension out to 2021 to use those funds. I spent time going through each one of those things. The other thing I wanted to mention about that waiver. So we got the waiver to extend the funds on the 18T1SF funds for an additional year. The board also voted, well, this is, again, if you're following along in the plot of this movie that we're currently living in March, the board voted to suspend the requirements for the administration of statewide assessments, and then instructed our superintendent to pursue all necessary waivers from federal and state laws. So what was waived are the assessments, including RISE for students grades 3 through 8 and the Utah Aspire Plus for students grade 9 through 10. Well, because the identification and the progress towards exit for schools in school improvement, there were some waivers that were done there that we'll talk a little bit more about. So there was no assessment. We will not identify any schools for state school turnaround for the 2021 school year. I'm sorry, yeah, for the 2021 school year. The schools that are currently identified for CSI will hold in their status where they were in CSI, and there will be no new schools identified for TSI during the 2021 school year. And I'll pause here for any questions. That's an overview with some of the things that we know here moving forward into this school year.
Doesn't appear to be any questions in the chat, Max. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Okay, moving forward in some of the things that we know and some of the things that we're learning, I'll turn the time over to my colleague, Leslie Evans.
Thanks, Max. Sounds better now. Good to, yes, quote unquote, see you all here today. I just wanted to go over the CSI exit criteria in brief, because as Max mentioned, and you all know, that assessment results were not available this school year. And so we wanted to talk about how that impacts the exit and ongoing identification for schools in CSI. So just as a reminder, the CSI has two different categories. So comprehensive school improvement for overall performance. In other words, Title I school accountability results were in the lowest 5% for 3 years on average. So they were identified. And then we have a different category for low graduation rate. That is that 3 years on average, that school, any high school that had a graduation rate below 67% would have been identified. So the exit criteria for the overall performance category is that at the end of the 4 years, that school will be above the 15% of Title I schools. And CSI for graduation rate, they'll exit if their graduation rate is above 67% for the second and third year. So if you're like me, a visual helps. So next slide, please. So as you know, we have one cohort or one group of schools that were identified for CSI in 1819. And that was the identification and planning year. We call it year 0. Year 1 was this last school year, 1920. That was the first year the schools had a school improvement plan and were implementing that plan. Next year will be what we call year 3, so or 2, 0, 1, 2. And that year, this year's graduation rate will count. If you'll see the green bar below, high schools with low grad rate need to be above that 67% for 2 years consecutively. Graduation rate is one of the data points that has been available to schools. And so the waiver for accountability results will not affect that. And then for the overall performance schools, the year 21-22 will be the year that those schools need to be above the 15% cutoff for Title I schools. I'm hoping this graphic helps. We'll be discussing more with individual schools who are identified, but please reach out if you have questions. And maybe now is a good time to pause for questions. I don't see any in the chat. Okay. Yeah.
Leslie, one question from me. I just want to clarify, when we're saying above 15%, we are talking about the overall total as part of our school assessment system.
Yeah, thank you. So each year you can find a rank order list of schools in Utah. We're concerned specifically with the rank order list of Title I schools in Utah. So there will be a 15% cut. So as they're ranked, the lowest 15% of schools are identified. And the CSI schools will exit if they're above that 15% cut. Sort of a clumsy description, I hope.
That's okay. We have another question too. For this cohort 1 that was identified in year 0, 2018-19, the only year that determines their exit will be based on the 2021-2022 data, correct?
Yes, so if you go back to the CSI exit criteria in brief slide, the criteria laid out in the Utah's consolidated plan or ESSA plan indicates that it needs to be that fourth year, that final year, which is 21-22 for this cohort, that the school needs to be above the lowest performing 15% of Title I schools. Did that answer your question, Aaron? Okay, great. So then just conversely, that the high schools will need 2 years above 67% grad rate. And essentially this slide summarizes that. So to exit for overall performance, there's the criteria, and for low graduation rate, the criteria in words rather than a picture. So next slide. So as Max mentioned, that we also have schools in the State School Turnaround and Leadership Development Act identification category. And there have been multiple cohorts since 2015 of these schools. So cohort 1 and 2 have been involved in discussions with our team and a state review panel. Their exit is pending because we didn't have assessment results. There was a new process approved by the board. So we have reviewed their presentations for exit, and those recommendations will be made in a public board meeting 1st of September. Cohort 3 is on hold in the current status because this past year's assessment results would have counted towards their exit. So we're counting that as a hold. More information to come to for those individual schools as well. And then cohort 4 was recently identified, and we do have some pending changes to administrative rule, and we will keep you posted on that as well. Only 2 schools were identified for cohort 4. Any individual questions? I know those categories pertain only to a select number of schools, so please reach out with questions. Thanks, Becky. Next one. So targeted support and improvement, Becky did, Dr. Donaldson did refer to the TSI lists and the number of schools who have been identified for the 2 years we have identified TSI. We will not identify this year. There are about 500 schools who are on the list that you can access at the Accountability and Assessment website. Then they are identified for having student groups, which does include all the ethnic groups and student groups who are performing lower than the 5%. We can go into deep detail on how those calculations are made, and we're happy to answer any questions, but we felt today was not the day to go back into all of that. So again, no TSI identifications, and the 1920 school year will not count toward exit. Essentially, it's a hold year or skip. And another more information to come on how exit will be determined for TSI.
One more question, Leslie, that came up.
Great.
From Aaron, am I right in assuming that upcoming cohort 2 of CSI will be determined from these years, 2019-20, 2020-21, and 2021-22?
That's a great question, Aaron. It's obviously one we're discussing. Since 1920 did not yield accountability system results, it's difficult to argue that that cohort should be identified based on 3 years on average. So that discussion is happening at the higher levels than I am at, and we are working to determine that. But we are scheduled to identify fall 22. Okay. This concludes my portion of the presentation. Thanks for listening.
Hi, everyone. This is Val Murdoch. I'm the Title I monitoring specialist, and I'm like board member that doesn't know how to turn on my camera. So I will stay incognito unless someone turns it on for me. I always like going after Max and Leslie because it makes Title I monitoring seem very straightforward. It's good to see so many familiar names. We have people from Washington County, from San Juan, all the way to Logan. And it is hard to not be in person with you. We also have some new names that I don't recognize, so welcome to those of you. And for those of you who will be viewing this later, we appreciate all the work that you have done and all the work you are doing to get ready for school. If you have questions, I told Tracy to just interrupt me with questions so we can answer them in real time. All of you have something in common. Your LEA is receiving Title I funding, and whether it's for a few $1,000s to multiple millions of dollars, everyone has to demonstrate they are responsibly using the Title I funds. It's the deal. And Becky has done an extensive job of laying out for you the requirements. And so my job is to monitor the programmatic aspects of those and ensure that they are being done. But there has been a shift to not just checking off boxes, but looking at the quality of Title I programs. The next slide, please. Often LEAs feel very stressed out. They're stressed up until the actual on-site monitoring visit. They're stressed throughout the visit. And it would be really nice to get to the point when monitoring doesn't seem like a death-defying performance, but rather an opportunity to self-reflect and to show off how a school community has thoughtfully planned and used its Title I funds in effective, student-centered ways. And we have seen that as we've been visiting schools. Schools have implemented some amazing programs to benefit their struggling students and the school overall. In the next slide, you'll see the two different ways that we conduct the monitoring. As Becky mentioned, one part is the desktop monitoring that's done every year, and then the on-site monitoring, which this year now has quote marks around on-site, because proceeding in the near future, that will indicate online. We don't know where we'll be in the winter, in the spring, but for now we'll consider that virtual visits. We definitely don't want to be known as the USBE super spreaders as we go travel throughout the state. And in the next slide, you'll see that the two instruments that are used for the desktop monitoring are the Utah Grants Management System, which Becky described, which Dr. Donaldson described in detail, and then the desktop monitoring instrument, also known as the DMI. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about the DMI. And the next slide is just so it orients you that this is one tool that we use. Like Becky said, it's due on November 1st, and you'll get a lot of more detail in the September 23rd meeting. In the next slide, the desktop monitoring instrument is due December 1st, and you'll also receive more information on the 23rd. The afternoon will be dedicated just to the DMI. You see on that slide, if you have any problems logging in, you can contact just the DMI help desk, and that email just goes directly to Renee Medina or Becky Peters. So you could email them directly as well if you're having a hard time logging in. You may want to try that between now and the next few weeks, because the DMI will be open no later than the end of August for you to begin working on that. I think Becky has just dropped the link in the chat. Thank you, Becky Peters, for dropping that in there, so you can check to see if your login information is working, but not right now, maybe after. In the next slide, you notice the annual core. I'm sorry, I missed explaining that the DMI has two components: an annual core, which is done every year, and then a cycle. This current year cycle is cycle 1. So we break down chunks so that LEAs don't have to do all of the desktop monitoring every single year. The annual core is something that is repeated from year to year. You'll notice The first few, there's a summary of the process to contact private schools and the Equitable Services Checklist. These are just for LEAs, district LEAs that have private schools within their school boundaries. And as many LEAs found out, when the CARES Act funding was distributed, they discovered they had other private schools that they didn't know about that came out of the woodwork for the services that they could qualify for. So every year, LEA districts are required to do their due diligence and search for any new private school that may be in their boundaries or may be serving students in Title I school, in qualifying Title I schools. The next one is a documentation of the current year's annual Title I meeting. And as Becky said, this is going to be a little different, and I will spend some more time talking about those. The final three are fiscal documents, and Tammy and Sandy will discuss more about those. And now you can go to the next slide. So we had the annual core on the previous slide, and this slide shows the focus of the cycle. Cycle 1 will focus on equitable access of students to effective educators, as well as the qualifications of the teachers and paraprofessionals in the Title I schools. In the next slide, you see the required parts of cycle 1. Those will be summaries. So LEAs will write summaries indicating how they ensure that the students who are identified as low income and minority students are not taught at higher rates by ineffective, inexperienced, or out-of-field teachers. And then you will also describe how the LEA ensures that those teachers that need to be state qualified in school-wide schools, that's all of them, are licensed. And for paraprofessionals, they're highly qualified. And Becky went into great detail on that and also gave the link to the fiscal handbook. And I have just notated the page numbers where you can find those requirements. In the next slide, you could, if I know it's close, some things to get started on now for this school year. The annual Title I meeting. So as Becky mentioned, you may choose to have a virtual meeting. Provo School District, and Michelle, I see you in the attendees list. So I'm going to describe a little bit about what principals have done in your district. Some principals have done a Facebook Live event and have recorded it and posted that on the website. So that's certainly something you could do. If you do better, if a principal does better at recording themselves, they could do that and then post that on the website or send it out in a link. So again, we have to get very creative during these times. I will, anybody can email me for the requirements in that Title I meeting. They're pretty dry, to tell you the truth. And so I would suggest that along with the dry requirements, that you add some spice and things like look at what the reading scores were last year. And this is how we're using our Title I funding, and give parents the information they really want to know, along with meeting the requirements of Title I. During that meeting, you can reference the engagement policies that Becky talked about and the compact. Many people still distribute those in a paper form. That's not required. If you have links that you can send out in newsletters, have them posted on websites, that will be just as good. If you have people that may not have access to the online version, then definitely have paper versions available for them. I was thinking about the school family compact and how it could be updated in the time of COVID as many parents' responsibilities have slightly shifted in the whole education process. But we also know that time is a big factor, and your ability to do everything is limited. And the parents' right to know, Becky already went through that list. I would add one more. Parents have the right to know, and they should be made aware of all these rights to know during that Title I meeting. They have the right to know that if their child is being taught or tutored by a paraprofessional, and whether that professional is highly qualified or not. I don't see any questions on that, so we'll go to the next slide. You've heard me mention a few times that you could put a link on your website. And this happens to be from a school in Provo School District, Spring Creek Elementary, one of our distinguished Title I schools. Provo has a template that they use for all of their schools, so the schools can just drop the pertinent information in there. It's interesting to me before I go out for a Title I monitoring visit, I look at the LEA webpage, and I also look at the school's web pages to see what they have as far as Title I goes. And I'm always shocked that they have information about trust lands and they don't have anything about Title I. So I'm going to give you a huge suggestion and ensure that your LEA and your schools have a Title I page on your website. There's so much information that can be put there, including, again, a link to the PowerPoint used in the Title I annual meeting, or the video that was created. You see in the Provo, they have their parent and family compact, their parent school compact. They have their engagement policy. The documents are in English and Spanish. There's a link to the district Title I page. And I didn't fit all of the web page on there, but they also have the rights to know down at the bottom. And then I'll discuss something else that you can't quite see. It's off that page. If you go to the next slide, I had to modify this. Actually, the LEA report card, the Title I plan summary down there at the bottom, that is something that Spring Creek Elementary has on their website. You just can't see it. They have goals at a glance. So you don't have to put up the entire school improvement plan or whatever your district or LEA calls your plan, but definitely pull out the goals that are related to Title I and how your LEA and schools are determining how the funding will be allocated. In the next slide, I had to modify this for the COVID times, and instead of suggesting all of these, I'm just suggesting the safe ones to share information with families. So again, you all have been doing this for months already, and so we appreciate the workarounds that you've found in order to meet some of these requirements. In the next slide, there are 3 different times an LEA would be monitored. Monitored in their second year of being a Title I LEA, just as a check-in to see how things are going, to make sure that they have the documentation that Becky went over, and to answer questions. The second way LEAs are monitored is every 5, and now you see that 5-ish years. Some LEAs were not monitored last year because they were considered low risk and will be monitored this year. Other LEAs that were scheduled this year need to have an on-site visit, and so we wanted to ensure that and bump them to next year. The third way is a monitoring visit based on risk, and that is determined by a risk assessment that the USBE has created for the agency-wide use. And in the next slide, the drum roll, please. These are the LEAs that will receive a so-called on-site monitoring visit, most likely online monitoring visit. I'll give you a chance to look over that, but if your LEA is on the list, you will soon be receiving information about the process of monitoring. Last year, every LEA that was monitored was able to choose a date that worked well for them, except for one. And the only reason they didn't get to choose is because we did a combined monitoring visit with Title III and that date had already been set. So hopefully everybody will be able to find a date that works best for them. And again, we'll refine the monitoring visit online and let you know what the details are there. If you'll go to the next slide. Monitoring, like I mentioned before, is both programmatic and fiscal. I'll be discussing the programmatic, and then Tammy and Sandy will go over some of the components of the fiscal monitoring as well. So as Becky said, LEAs and schools need to identify the needs of the students. Without a really good comprehensive needs assessment, the plan is worthless. And so when we monitor, I want to see, what did you use to determine the needs? What were the top priorities that you determined? How did you determine that? And then that creates your plans. And so I'll also be asking for documentation to show what your goals are for the use of Title I funding, as well as your school improvement plan. And of course, how is the allocation of funding impacting student outcomes? So we'll have documentation, stakeholder interviews, observation, all to provide a glimpse into how you go about planning a Title I program. And I still don't see any questions. So I'll go to a little bit about the stakeholder interviews. Stakeholder interviews, at this point, I'm thinking LEAs will have the choice of either having an online kind of Zoom-like meeting with all the stakeholders, so like a student stakeholder group, a parent stakeholder group, a teacher stakeholder group, etc., or fill out Qualtrics surveys for each of the different stakeholder groups. So again, more information will be sent out about that and your ability to choose between those two formats. The director and Title I director principal interviews will be virtual. So those will not be a Qualtrics survey. The stakeholder interviews have 3 different pillars. As you see, equity, collective efficacy, instruction and support, relationships, and climate. And those 3 pillars are based on the research from the research of Budge and Parrott, High Poverty, High Performing Schools, the equity work by Paul Gorski, Hattie's work on effect size and high impact strategy, and other research. Now, there are rarely findings with this type of information. It's more for feedback to inform your Title I plan. If you'll go to the next slide, in 1937, in his second inaugural address, FDR said, "The test of our progress," and I guess my slides are out of order. This did not get in there. Okay, I'm just going to tell it to you. "The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough to those who have too little." So the progress is not whether we add more to those who already have. It's whether we provide enough to those who have too little. And he was not talking about Title I because Title I didn't even exist. He was 30 years before his time. But I think this applies nicely to Title I. So the slide that you see now is a list of technical assistance and support, and Becky has already gone over all of this. So if you have any questions about anything at any time, please call or email. Our team is really good about getting back to you quickly. And if we don't have the answers, then we will get your email, your question to someone who does know that. And then the final slide. Monitoring does come with teeth, but it also comes with support, just no refreshments.
Thank you, Val. Any questions at this point, Tracy?
We do not have any new questions. Thank you.
All right, I want to thank Val and also Leslie and Max for the information that they presented. We're going to talk about some fiscal issues now. Tammy Long is our fiscal compliance manager for Title I-A. Sandy Grant is a fiscal specialist, and she works with some of the other titles and some of the state programs. Tammy Long is also the fiscal specialist for Title III. So I'm going to turn the time over to them, and we'll let them talk about fiscal issues, and then I'm going to wrap up at the end.
Okay, the funnest part for the end here is fiscal. And once you get your allocation for your title, there are required set-asides that the district can do. And the 4 required ones are equitable services for your private schools that are in your area, homeless, students, neglected and delinquent students, and for your parent and family engagement. And if you receive more than $500,000, at least 1% should be set aside for your required set aside. And also as a note that these funds are set aside at the district level, that also need to be monitored, or records need to be kept so that we know where those funds are being spent and how they were spent. So the districts are still required to follow that. Next slide. Okay, optional set-asides that you can do are for administration, % or less. You can spend it on your pre-K or extended K programs, foster care, or the comprehensive CSI, TSI schools or programs, which however you want to monitor those. But those are optional, and just keep that in mind. Next slide. LEA managed initiatives. The district managed initiatives are set aside for the Title I schools, such as your extended day learning, full day extended day kindergarten, pre-K, summer schools. And so Title I monies can be set aside for each of these programs as the districts see fit. Next slide. The use of Title I funds. Title I funds should be to help implement the goals and objectives that the districts have decided that that's what they want to spend their money on. So their programs to support individual student achievement. And then we always have the supplement, not supplant, that we always have to watch out for, because Title I funds are in addition to your state funding sources. Title I funds may be used to pay for services for federal funding sources. LEAs must have a written methodology to show how they're going to receive all the state and local funds and how they're going to supplement with their federal funds. So you must have a written policies and procedures on how you stay Title I neutral with the use of the Title I funds. Next slide. Okay, and the use of Title I funds, there's a comparability report that I'm sure you've all seen. And there's two ways to do it. You can look at using your students and your instructional staff ratios to come up with your funding sources of how you want to use your money, or curriculum and instrumental supplies per students. So you have a choice of how you want to use your comparability report, and the report we have will help you walk you through that to come up with your best solution for your districts.
Can I enter something just for a minute?
You may.
On the comparability report, there are two methods, but the two different methods imply how you're going to do your students and staff. It can be a ratio or it can be a cost. So one of those two, but curriculum materials must be included. So that's a slide just a little off on that one. Sorry.
That's fine. Thank you. Next slide. Allowable use of Title I funds. And if you ever question what you're going to use your funds on and you would like to know before you spend them, please call us. But allowable funds for professional learning opportunities for teachers, supplemental textbook and supplies not used for Tier 1, extended day year programs, early childhood programs for pre-K, extended day kindergarten, parent and family engagement activities, counseling, accelerated high-quality curriculum that enables disadvantaged students to achieve challenging state standards, and supplemental personnel to help support these programs. Next slide, please. Okay, grading funds. So, effective way to help enhance your funds is to grade your funds and to, because some LEAs only get a small amount of like Title I and Title II and Title III. So if they combine them, then they have more leverage to help students out and putting their funds together. So if there's any questions on how to do this, you could contact us and we could go over it. But it really helps improve the educational outcome for all students. And we will provide more information on that in the next Title I directors meeting. Reimbursement request. They're all done through the Utah Grants Management System, and we would suggest that the requests be made at least quarterly. If they're not done quarterly, then the risk to the LEA goes up. So it's better that you do them more often. And the LEA consolidated plans are due November 1st. Desktop monitoring is November 1st and December 1st for the desktop monitoring. And requests must be, if you're requesting for reimbursement, you need to do them by the 25th of the prior month to get it before the last day of the following month. And a copy of your general ledger must be attached to the request. And also, if you just send me journal entries, I'm going to send it back and say, who was paid with these funds, what was purchased with these funds. So it needs to be more detailed ledger than just journal entries, or you probably have seen those coming back to you. So,
Tammy, just for a minute. The reason that we asked for your request at the 25th of the prior month and not the deadline set by Utah Grants is because if we have any questions, any problems that we see with that reimbursement request, this gives you time to fix those and get them in before the last day that Utah Grant says they need to be in. And so it gives us time to look at it, to help work out any problems with it. And so you still get paid by the end of the month, of the next month.
Okay, thank you. And next slide. Okay, and so by submitting everything on time helps keep your risk down, and your risk, but not limited to, your single audit findings that you submit to USBE every year. Monitor findings that we find either on a desktop monitoring or if we come out or a virtual monitoring. Failure to submit your annual assurances by July 1st always puts a red flag in your corner. And failure to complete the annual Title I plan by November 1st. And if you fail to complete the DMI by December 1st. So I know it's hard to keep up on all this stuff, but all these dates matter and keep you in good standing with risk assessment. And your assurances submissions is vital, since the funds cannot begin until your assurances have been assured. For example, if assurances are not submitted until November 10th, that means you can't claim funds until November 10th. So you just need to make sure that you're on top of all that and that you're completing all these tasks on time. And current fiscal year funds cannot be requested until the annual plan and the DMI are complete and approved. So sometimes we've had to send things back because the things are not complete yet, or you'll get an email from us saying, you need to go in and complete these things before we can do your reimbursement request. And because they will not be approved unless they are, unless you've completed all these things. And also you must expend your prior year money funds before you can go to the current year funds. So always do the oldest funds first. Next slide. Okay. Reimbursement requests covering the period of up to and including June 30th expenses due by the first week of July or state reporting purposes June 30th. And September 30th is for the covering up to the federal fiscal reporting year. So you try to get those due by October 25th so that they will be meet all the federal requirements to get all those funds reimbursed. Next slide. A minimum of at least one reimbursement request will be monitored each year for risk. That means we may put it on hold, like if your DMI is not complete, your annual cycles are not complete. But we always like to see time and effort document, at least on one of the requests. And if you do all your requests at once, then we will usually require it. And if you have failed to meet, went black. If you've failed to meet the, or if the refund is a large refund, you haven't met your deadlines, or you're not requesting quarterly, then your risk assessment would go up and we would require more documentation for your reimbursement request. Next slide. Okay, and then we come to time and effort. And whether anytime you are receiving federal funds, time and effort is a requirement. And Employees paid through any of the programs, you must keep time and effort. And a cost objective, a function, organizational subdivision, contracts, grants, and other activities needed for which costs are incurred by employees that are paid with state and federal funds. So basically, time and effort is a requirement we're never going to get away from. Slide. Employees paid with federal funds must maintain a distribution record that identify the specific program or cost objective they work on. So if you're working on several programs, it just needs to have time and effort that shows exactly what you're working on. And you can do monthly certifications, semi-annual certifications, and for Title I schools, an employee must work on the same program for 100% of their time, like in Title I, Title III, or any of the other programs. An LEA must have written policy and procedures on how they're going to document and handle their time and effort. And so it's really critical that you have the policy and that you follow your policy, because that's what we look at to make sure that you're following the procedures that you have outlined. Next slide. Okay. All employees, time and effort, 100%, single federal program. And these are the items that must be included on the time and effort document. Your name, the employee's name, where they're working, because some employees work between different schools, the job title and description, your FTE hours, your signatures and dates, and your certification period. So you start the first of the month and you end the last day of the month, or whatever it is, what program you're working on, and you're going to certify that it's 100% of your activities, and this is what you did, and then your supervisor will sign and date it. Next slide. Employees working on multiple programs or a combination of federal programs and non-federal programs are required to maintain monthly certification that shows all cost codes, cost objectives. So if you work 10 hours, you must show what you did for the total 10 hours, even if, say, 5 hours were in Title I, you still must tell us what the other 5 hours were spent doing. Next slide. And so here's for the employee working on more than one cost objective code, must include the following criteria, the 6 criteria: the name, job title, total hours worked, and the time period that is worked, all cost codes that are incurred during that work time, and then your signature and date of both employee and the supervisor. Next slide. Alternative method for employees who work a fixed schedule under more than one cost objective. So that means the employee is going to work the same schedule every day, all the time, and which are easy, and then they can certify those for the whole month, or if they do it for extended periods, they could also, as long as they do it for, if they did the same schedule for 2 months, they could do it for 2 months. You must have sufficient controls and policies to ensure that the schedules are accurate. And this certification may be used by USB personnel for monitoring purposes. Next slide. Okay. Alternative employees must use for time and effort. If you're currently working on a schedule that includes multiple cost of activities or objectives, work on a specific activity or cost objective based on a predetermined schedule. That means you're going to do this every day. and not work on multiple activities or cost objective at the same exact time. So next slide, please. Employee schedules must indicate the specific activity and cost objective work for each segment of schedule. Account for total hours for which compensation is received. Be certified at least semi-annually or each significant schedule change. So if you do it for 6 months and you work that same schedule for 6 months, then you only have to certify it for the 6 months. But say you did it 4 months and then they decided to change your schedule. So then just certify it for the 4 months and then go to the new schedule. And they always must be signed by both employee and supervisor and dated. Next slide, please. Title I carryover policy. Okay, so we can only carry over no more than 50% of Title I funds. And it's based on the October reimbursement request that it includes expenditures through September. So you have to do that request for reimbursement in order to qualify to request the 15% carryover. LEAs may request a waiver of carryover greater than 15% no more than once every 3 years. And we're going to have an exception to that because of COVID. This is a one, and because of COVID, there's a one-time federal waiver for LEAs to carry more than 15% over for your state fiscal year 2019 funds. So it doesn't affect the last 3 years. I'm sure everybody's clear on that. So I know. So if you had, so this year, this 1 year will not count in your 3-year cycle. It's an automatic. But you must, if you're going to request a waiver, you must submit it to Director Donaldson by November 1st, and you can refer to the handbook to see what and it must be in writing, and there's a sample letter in there, and it's really fairly easy to do. So if you need a waiver, go to the handbook and fill out the letter.
Tammy, this is Tracy, and I have a question just to clarify for that.
Okay.
In regards to the letter, you're saying that we have this one-time federal waiver. Does that mean every group that's receiving Title I funds should also submit a letter to Dr. Donaldson this year?
Becky, do you want to answer that? Because I would say they don't need to.
Yeah, no, it does not mean that. It means that it's like, for example, we had a couple of LEAs or so that, requested a letter of waiver, and they hadn't had a waiver for the past 3 years. So they submit a letter, we review that, and, either grant it or go back with additional questions. But because of COVID, that upset the whole spring of the school year and impacted into the summer. The Department of Education indicated that just for those state fiscal year 2019 funds, if the LEA needs to carry over more than 15%, even if they requested a waiver last year, they can request another waiver because of COVID. But this is a one-time waiver only. So it's only for state fiscal year 2019. And it doesn't count against the district that they had one within the past 3 years.
Perfect. I just want to clarify because those are side by side. So I wanted to make sure everyone realized that in normal years, they submit the letter, but in this past year, because of COVID-19, they are not required to put one in.
Well, they're still going to do a waiver. Even if they need to request it for 2019, they'll still submit a waiver. It just doesn't have anything to do with the one time in 3 years.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, expiration dates for funds. So for the federal Title I funds available for 27 months, and an initial 12 months plus an additional 15 months due to the Tiding Funds Amendment. So, and the 2019 funds will now expire in September of 2021 due to the COVID. So we're getting an extra year on those funds. The normal expiration date would have been September 2020. Okay, on your 2020 funds, they will expire September 2021, and the 2021 funds will expire September 2022. So all I can say is you might want to print this out and decorate your walls with it, just so you know of these dates that have kind of changed due to all the COVID and the craziness that's going on. But just we have a little more time on the 2019 funds. Next slide.
Are there any questions? That ends the fiscal section.
Okay.
No questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay, we're going to wrap up now. So again, I think everyone has mentioned this during their sections. If you need assistance, reach out to our team. The past couple of years when we've had this new directors meeting, we passed around a list for people that wanted to have a team of our staff come out to your LEA and meet with you, sit down individually. Someone's got their mic open. Thank you, Tammy. So we would come out to your LEA and meet with you, but because of COVID, we're not allowed right now to travel out to LEAs by directive of state superintendent. Or we could have people come in and meet with us, which again is really not an option right now. Our office is still currently closed. We think we may be going back in small groups to the office sometime in mid-September. We're not quite sure how that's going to look, but because Salt Lake is still in orange and still kind of a hot spot, they're being very cautious about that. So we won't be able to come out to your LEA and meet with you or have you come in, but we can set up a virtual meeting over Microsoft Teams where we can see you and hear you and answer all your questions that you may have on an individual LEA basis. We're more than happy to do that. So if you want that kind of assistance, please email me and we'll include the appropriate people on our team that would participate in that in a virtual session or phone conference call. Here's the contact information for our team, and I apologize, I didn't know Tracy's phone number when I put this slide together, but I'm the coordinator of a team. Tracy is a director and will be kicking off this new Center for Continuous School Improvement. And she will be reaching across our agency to, integrate and align all the various initiatives that are taking place that impact school improvement. So we have Max and Leslie that have, the background information on ESSA school improvement for CSI, TSI, as well as state turnaround. Jeff Ojeda, who does our migrant education and also homeless education. Tammy Long is our fiscal compliance manager. As I said, she will be overseeing Title I and Title III. Sandy Grant works with the other programs. Val Murdoch, Title I monitoring. Dr. Christelle Estrada works with Title III. Language acquisition services for students who are English learners, as well as supporting students who are recent immigrants and refugees. Camille Sheik works with Title IV-B, which is 21st Century Community Learning Centers. Robert Palmer, Intergenerational Poverty Grants and Partnerships for Student Success. Kelly Smith works in the Financial Operations Department with the Utah Grants Management Team. and supports the grants management help desk. And Dr. Chuck Foster is our Title VI American Indian Education Specialist. Cheryl Ellsworth is our specialist who works with parent, family, and community engagement. And Renee Medina is one of our office support staff members. Becky Peters is the executive secretary. And so I'm going to pause again at this point to see if there are any final questions.
Becky, I threw my phone number in the chat, 801-538-7590. I haven't been able to use it yet, but I'm excited I have one.
Yeah, so I don't think she even has a phone that's hooked up at this point, but that's great. I'll update this slide, and then we'll make that available when we send these out again, and we'll post the slides as well on our website, and I'll make sure Tracy's number is updated. So that concludes our presentations for today. I can't really see the box in my view. Maybe if I stop sharing my screen, I can see what's happening with WebEx. Because I really wasn't aware of everybody that was on or looking at the chat box. So, okay, now I can see. So I just want to take a look at who all the attendees are. It looks like we have some great people involved here. Some of you are Title I directors who've been in that position for a few years. Some of you, I see some new names. And so we welcome all of you and look forward. We're hoping at some point in time we can actually meet with you in person. Hopefully we can get this virus under control and possibly meet again in the summer. Some of you had expressed interest. We were planning to do a state systems conference that was scheduled the last week of July. And we have two really incredible keynote speakers lined up. Tara Brown, she refers to herself as the connection coach, and she is just dynamite. So she had agreed to come, and she has agreed to come next year. If we can meet face to face again in the next summer, we'll put that conference back in the works, and we hope to be able to meet with people in person. And but anyway, we're looking forward to that. So we appreciate those of you that expressed interest, and hopefully that will go forward in the future. But I just want to express my really deep and sincere gratitude for everything that you've been doing. We know things have been so challenging and you've been so busy, but you're so wonderful to work with all the time. I am so grateful for every one of you. I'm so grateful that our team has the privilege of associating with you and knowing of the wonderful work that you're doing, the support you're providing to children and youth and educators and families is just really remarkable. And certainly so many innovative things have been occurring, and you know, certainly looking forward to all the innovative things that will be taking place for children this new school year in such a challenging time. But we are so grateful. And I want to thank you. Thank you for your time, for being here. And please reach out if there's anything that we can do to support you. And with that, we're going to conclude. Our team can stay on for a few minutes if some of you have questions that you'd still like to address our way. But other than that, please have a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful weekend. And I wish you the very best, that you will be healthy and safe and happy and have a wonderful school year. Thanks, everyone. And I want to thank my team as well for their excellent work.